right? So all good, all right?
All right, awesome. Thanks, Damon. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone, and we're recording today, so this will go out too. So if you you want a copy of it. All right, everyone, statement going on from the Corcoran Group. We are going to start going today on our first-time homebuyers lunch break presentation. Hope you guys are all doing well. I'm going to get us set up here. We are going to go into presenter view of Canva. So just bear with me for a couple seconds. And let's see. All right. Oh, we got someone popping in. All right, everyone. So we are going to start presenting now. Just give me a moment. All right, everyone. So again, topic of today's seminar are first-time homebuyers, kind of lunch break. It's about a 20-30 minute presentation by me. It's meant for very early stage folks in the home buying process, right? So we're talking about people that maybe aren't ready to buy a home today, but they're more in sort of the information gathering stage, right? So if you guys have any questions at the end of the seminar, feel free to send them my way. I'm happy to answer. Just send them in the chat, and we'll get to them afterwards. Also, if you guys would like a copy of this, we are recording today, so I will happily send you one after. All right. So today, let's get started here. Here's your agenda. You know, we're going to go through home buying myths, first things to do when you're owning a home, process, FAQs. This is me, Damon. I have been a real estate agent since 2014 in New York City. So 9 years to date, I've helped over 150 buyers and sellers on real estate transactions. I'm also a former mortgage lender, and I also invest in real estate myself, right? So my mission statements, or sorry, what are the career highlights here? I've been an entrepreneur since 2003. I formerly was in the music industry as a concert promoter. Did that career for about 10 years, then broke into the real estate industry in 2014 and started a team with my wife, Rihanna, in 2018. Got a loan originator license in 2021 and hit $100 million in career sales in 2022. All right, so my mission in the real estate business is to empower home buyers to make great purchase decisions with an informational advantage and a fully supported team, meaning that if people work with me, I want them to be the most educated buyers on the planet. I want them to not have buyer's remorse, and I want them to take time of the process and really get to understand home buying, right? So I really appreciate when I talk to people that they're way early, like saying they want to buy a home in the middle of 2024. It's never too early to start. Buying a home is very daunting. It is one of the largest investments people will make in their life. And, you know, I want you to get the education and experience. So when it's time for you, you will be prepared, ready, and confident. So without further ado, we'll get started right on. First thing that I always like to cover are common home buying myths, and there's 6 of them. So we're gonna go right into them, okay? Myth number 1, and you need 20% down to buy a home in New York City. That is not true. Only 38% of buyers in the United States have a down payment that is above 20%, is 20% or above. The other 62% of buyers do not, right? So when people talk about that from a New York City concept, one common question and common concern that people have is, well, Damon, I was looking at a cooperative property, and the co-op told me I need 20% down, which is most likely true. Co-ops are a very quirky part of the New York City housing market that does not exist in most of the rest of the US, right? So in a co-op apartment, you are not a deed holder, rather you are a shareholder. So a co-op, essentially everybody who owns their apartments in a co-op are collective shareholders in a corporation that owns the building. So what does that mean in common practice? That means that co-ops can basically set their own guidelines beyond mortgage guidelines of a down payment. So you'll often walk into buildings and they will, or you'll be talking to your agent or whatever, and they say like, oh, well, you need 20% down. And that may be true if you're looking to buy a co-op. However, if you're looking to buy a condo, single family house, or even sometimes a multifamily house, that is not the case. A lot of agents in the business don't actually know this, right? So when you're talking to your agent, make sure that you let them know you went to a home buyer seminar and Damon said you can do it. Of those 150 sales that I have done in my career, about 40% of those buyers actually put less than 20% down on their down payment. So that is one of the most common myths, a myth that 35% of prospective home buyers still believe, and absolutely not the case. All right, myth number 2. The first step is looking at houses. Now, that's debatable, right? Sometimes we're all on like Zillow stalking properties, things like that. But what may happen if you're not, for example, if you don't have a mortgage pre-approval in place, is you'll start looking at houses and then you'll try to figure out how to make it work, right? And the reality of the New York City housing market is if properties are priced well, they are generally going to sell a lot of times within the first 14 or 21 days on the market, right? So if you want to be a home buyer, right, I highly recommend that you speak to a lender first to kind of give an idea of what you can actually afford. Because a lot of times what will happen is if you do not do that, sometimes you'll run into a situation where you end up falling in love with a home that's outside of your price range. That can be a really heartbreaking experience and kind of leave a bad taste in your mouth of the home buying experience in general, right? So please, lender first, right? Lender, agent, team, things like that, then house. Myth number 3, you can't get a mortgage if you're self-employed. Not true. I am self-employed. I've gotten many mortgages. In order to get a mortgage, if you're self-employed, generally you need at least 2 years of self-employment income in the same industry. If you're newly self-employed, some lenders may make an exception. If you have 1 year of self-employment tax returns plus a W-2 from an employer in the same field. Let's say that for example, we had a client that was a software developer, and then he went ahead and launched his own consulting business in that field, right? And we found a lender that was able to do that loan, right? Because they'd set the structure up so that he was taking a salary. He had a year of tax returns already, and he already had a job in that field, right? So other things to know when you're self-employed, right? There are sometimes higher credit score requirements. Sometimes there are higher reserve requirements. When you buy a home, sometimes you're going to not only deem the down payments and the closing costs, but you'll also have to have a few extra months of reserves for your mortgage payments that are still in your bank account after you close. We can get into that more in another topic, but yeah, so those are the 2 things. The last thing is self-employed is lenders really like it when the income in those last 2 years of tax returns is stable or increasing. If, for example, your last 2 years that you filed a tax return, the first year was awesome, the second year was not as good, generally that lenders are going to see that as what's called declining income, and they're going to qualify you based on the lower of the 2 years. So there we are. All right, moving on. Myth number 4, it is cheaper to rent than to own. Not sometimes true, depending on what you're looking at, oftentimes not true, right? So when you're looking at home ownership, right, you'll see that number 1, in the interest rate on rent is 100%, right? So you might as well be throwing money to a fire every month, right? That's just the truth, right? You're basically paying your landlord's mortgage and not your own. When you make a payment every month, right, a mortgage payment, you're not only paying the interest on your loan, but you're paying down the principal, right? So sometimes what you're going to be looking at is a scenario based on the equity that you're building every month, the actual net worth calculation versus being a renter, although in theory, you are spending maybe $300 or $400 extra a month in payments, on rent payments, does not equate because of those mortgage payments. Let's say you're paying down, just in this example, $1,000 a month in debt paid, right? You can see the spread there, right? So it's not always cheaper. It can be sometimes depending where rates are and what you're buying, right? So anyways, so that is myth number 4. Myth number 5, your credit score needs to be perfect. And I get this all the time when I talk to people that want to buy a home. They say, Damon, I have my credit's only 730 or something like that, right? Generally speaking, there are loan programs that you can get a mortgage all the way down to a 580 credit score, sometimes even lower than that. 620 is where a lot of lenders start for conventional loans, but certainly not 800 or 850. And believe it or not, somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of all prospective home buyers believe you need a perfect credit score. You don't. Truth be told, only 1% of Americans have a perfect credit score, where 62.9% own a home. So there you go, right? All right, and finally, myth number 6, all lenders are the same. This is often something that a lot of people in the real estate industry, agents specifically, will not understand. Lenders are very different, right? And offer very different products, right? So you will have credit unions that offer a specific suite of products. You will have big banks that offer a specific suite of products. You will have mortgage brokers that can work with different financial institutions. You'll have wholesale lenders, things like that, right? Essentially, what you're going to be looking at a lot of times of lenders are different products. Some banks, for example, will provide you incentives to open deposits on your rate. They will have different fee structures depending on the kind of loan you're getting, and different qualifying guidelines, right? So we'll get into this later, but when you're talking to lenders, like, please don't think that one size fits all. And if your agent says that to you, just understand that they probably themselves do not understand the mortgage industry. Not against them, nothing against them, but just that's the fact, right? All right, so there we are, guys. So now, let's say that you've gotten through the 6 myths and you've made it this far. Bless your heart, my friends. Now you're saying, okay, we want to buy a house, but we're really not ready to buy a house right now. So what should we do? A lot of real estate agents are going to say, okay, you got to get a pre-approval, you got to do this, you got to do that. You could, but the truth is, if you're not going to buy a house for a year and a half, what's the point of getting a pre-approval today? Right? So here's the things that I think you should do to kind of just get your financial picture together, okay? Thing number 1, understand your monthly budget, right? So I have a monthly budget tracker. I'm happy to share it with anyone on the call today or anyone that emails me. What you basically want to understand is your monthly burn rate right now, right? So one of the keys to having good financial intelligence is really understanding, hey, how much am I saving per month? How much more do I need to save a month to get to the down payment that I want to get to, right? Am I wasting money here on this expense? You know, really be like a savvy hawk of your monthly expenditures, right? Because the more that you can do that, the easier it's going to be for you to really conceptualize a mortgage payment, right? Because remember, if you're just paying rent right now, sometimes it's like a lot of folks, even high income earners, so please don't look at it any other way. They literally will spend money and have no tracking system whatsoever, right? So whether that is, you know, an app like Mint or something like that, or it's, you know, Google Sheets budget tracker like I use, just do something so that you understand your monthly budget and you look at different ways to sort of manage that, right? You do that, you're going to be ahead of 80% of Americans who do not keep a monthly budget. Okay, number 2, and I think this is a big one. A lot of times when you're looking at homes, right, what people will do, they will Google and Google and Google and say, well, Google told me this about working with an agent. Google told me this about like the kind of loans that are out there, things like that. And I say Google is not always your friend. You can't Google your way to success. So if you want to be a homeowner in the future, like a serious thing that you should consider is taking a home ownership education course, right? If you're listening to this to me today, you must have some interest in that, right? Fannie Mae who's basically a government sponsored entity. They have a free home ownership course called Home View. Home View. And basically that is fanniemae.com/education. Or if you must Google, go to google.com and search Fannie Mae Home View. Course is going to take you about 4 hours. It's going to explain a lot of concepts about things that lenders want to know. It's going to explain sort of things in the home, like what you should be looking for in the home process, the home search process. It's just going to be an overall sort of like really valuable thing that's going to put you ahead of a lot of folks that are also looking around you, right? Okay, moving right along. Last thing that one of the last things I would say on this is, take a look at your credit report, right? So a lot of people don't realize that everyone in America is entitled to one free credit report per year from the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Basically, TransUnion, Experian, Equifax have to give you one free copy of your credit report per year. And the site to get that credit report is annualcreditreport.com. And if you do that, why do you care, right? People are like, oh, well, my bank tells me what my score is, things like that, right? A lot of times what they're not doing, like Credit Karma or Chase or Capital One or one of those people that give you a score, it's not the same score that banks use, right? It's not a tri-merge score based on the 3 bureaus. So the reason that you want to look at your credit report is, I don't know if people realize this, almost 25% of credit reports are wrong. There's a debt on there that should have been taken off, things like that. The monthly payment is reported wrong. Or a missed payment is reported wrong, something like that. And when you're going to get a mortgage, one of the biggest things that a lender is going to look at is your credit score, right? So anything you can do to actually go and just have an understanding of your score, I would highly encourage you to do that. All right. So now, all right, guys. So we went through home buying myths. We went through 3 things that you can do early. Let's say that you've made it this far, right? And you said, okay, look, I really want to buy a house this year, right? We are going to go through steps in order to do that. Okay. All right. First step, I would always say, talk to a lender, talk to an agent, right? I'm going to say talk to an agent first, only because, and you shouldn't just talk to one, by the way, right? Yes, I'm a real estate agent. Yes, I do deals a lot in the city of New York, all over the place. But I've always told every single buyer that I've ever worked with, please talk to 2 or 3 real estate agents, because you want to know who the best fit for you is, right? You want to, like, maybe I'm not the perfect real estate agent for every person. Maybe I am, right? But, choice is power, right? And I highly encourage anyone who's looking at a house or wants to be a home buyer of any sort to compare a little bit, right? Like I just feel better that way. If after you do that, you feel good at working with my team, for example, fantastic, right? But if you just have general questions about finding an agent, please let me know, guys. I'm here to help people, right? Always, right? I'm pretty confident in our team's business at this point in my career, right? So I just want to be a good resource, right? Some questions you should ask your agents. How long have you been licensed for? Do you own your own home? How many buyers and sellers have you worked with? What neighborhoods do you work in? Things like that, right? And you're just going to get to feel people out. And you may have specific things that you want in a home, right? You may have a specific kind of property, right? Maybe you want to buy, a 19th century brownstone in Harlem, right? Maybe the agent that you're talking to sells condos in Tribeca, right? Maybe they're not maybe that's not the right mix, right? But get a feel for the person that you're talking to, right? So anyways, so that hopefully gets you focused there. Second thing, and this is the time, let's say you talk to an agent, you find an agent that you want to work with, right? Now is the time, I think, to get pre-approved, right? Just like an agent, I'm going to say that talking to 2 or 3 different lenders is good. Number 1, not everyone has the same products. Number 2, rates are different, structures are different, fees are different, things like that, right? Your agents, a lot of times, if they don't have mortgage industry experience themselves, and I mean this respectfully, they're going to recommend just the agent that they know or the lender that they know, right? And that might be a great lender, but it might not be the perfect lender for you, right? So talk to that person, but also talk to a couple more, right? And when you're ready to get your pre-approvals, right, this is going to help you set the tone for what you can actually afford, right? So you need a pre-approval to make an offer on a home. In order to get a pre-approval, you're generally going to have to submit to a lender. At minimum, you're going to have to get a credit check. You're going to have to submit information about your income, pay stubs, W-2s, things like that, right? You're going to have to submit bank statements to your lender. You're going to have to submit tax returns. Those things will kind of get you on your way, right? And then obviously, depending on the loan that you're getting and how far along you want to go in the process, the lender may ask for some additional information to send out the pre-approval. All right, so you've made it through this far, right? You got your pre-approval. Yay, now we start looking at homes, right? And the thing that I would say here is just to be open-minded a little, right? And I say this because in my 9 years in the business, right? Like I said, I've worked with about 150 buyers and sellers, about 70% of those on the buyer side of the transaction, right? And so often, I will meet a buyer and they say, this is where I want to live. I'm not willing to look at anything else, right? They look at houses, they look at condos, co-op, whatever it is, right? And they get incredibly discouraged because there's just never enough inventory. There's never enough choice. And I say, hey, look, why don't we just take a Sunday and we're going to go drive around to two new neighborhoods that maybe you weren't considering before, right? Pretty much of those like 70, maybe 100-ish buy-side clients, right? Of the 150, I would say about 60 or 70% of them actually ended up purchasing in a neighborhood that they were not originally considering. And why is that? Because once you start seeing what new areas can offer, that will help, opens your mind up to possibilities, right? Maybe the monthly payment's a lot easier there. Maybe the purchase prices, things like that, right? So just be open-minded. I would also say with this, don't be afraid to look at a lot of houses, right? I promise you, you're not putting your agent out by looking at a lot of properties. And, just to give you guys an idea, the average clients that we work with sometimes look at 100 properties before they make an offer. Not saying, trust me, we still work with people that look at 3, right? But I'm always encouraging people to look at more. And there's a reason. The biggest reason is I don't want you to ever feel rushed into making a purchase decision. And part of that is just really knowing the inventory, right? And getting a feel for things, right? A lot of times when you look at properties, like when someone starts looking at houses to buy, they think every single property in the market's overpriced, right? And that's just part of the educational process, right? So look at a lot of properties, be open-minded about your search within reason, right? Maybe if you're looking in Manhattan, you're not going to move to Staten Island, right? Get it, right? But, your agent is here to help you. They're not here to shove you into a house, right? They're here to build a lifelong relationship with you, right? So it's a collaborative process. All right. So you've made it through that process, and now you found the house that you want to buy and you're making an offer. All right, good stuff, right? So an agent is going to write an offer on your behalf, right? And what's going to be in that offer is the purchase price that you want to make an offer for, the down payment, copy of your pre-approval letter, a little bit about your financial position, things like that, right? Your agent will have kind of worksheets most likely for you to fill out in terms of what that purchase looks like, right? And that will basically tell the seller exactly everything that they need to know, like purchase price, down payment. It'll let them know that you're pre-approved by a bank. It'll let them know it's kind of been done on the pre-approval, and it'll let them know the terms, right? And now, very rarely in the real estate business is the first offer a buyer makes accepted, right? Sometimes it is, but a lot of times what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going through a process of negotiations, right? So you make your first offer to the seller. The seller says, oh, great. Thank you so much, Damon, for your offer. But here's our counter, right? And they're going to look for more money, right? And it's going to be a back and forth negotiation, right? This is where having an agent is super key, right? Because an agent is they're a non-emotional party in the transaction, right? A buyer's agent is there to get you the absolute best terms. So before you guys even make that offer, your agent should be coaching you on saying like, hey, here's all the comparable sales. Here's where I think the property is worth. Here's what I think we can get it for. Here's the strategy. Your agent should be outlining all that for you, right? Technically, your agent should be a trusted advisor that knows a bit about negotiating, right? And part of the strategy of offer, counter offer, down payment, contingencies, all of those different things is going to come together based on the experience of the person you're working with and conditions of the sale. So, all right, so you've made it to this point, right? You get an offer. Now the seller accepts your offer. Hallelujah, right? Guess what? In New York State, you are not in contract yet. In New York State, buyers and sellers are represented by attorneys. Real estate agents do not write contracts here. And if you're from out of state, this may be different than how it works in your state, right? There are a lot of states where the offer you make to the seller is a contract. And if they countersign that contract, now you're officially in contract. It works a little differently in New York. In New York, if you come to an accepted offer with a seller, the next step that's going to happen is the seller's attorney will then send a copy of the draft contract to your attorney. You're going to go back and forth, right? Your attorney and their attorney are going to be sort of negotiating the contract and the terms and things like that. This is where you have to find a trusted attorney, right? Ask your agent for recommendations there, or friends that that bought things like that. Having a great attorney is worth its weight in gold. It can save you time, money, energy, stress, all of that stuff, right? And the idea, basically, one thing that a lot of people are confused about is what it means to be in contract. To be in contract in New York City means that you have signed that contract. The seller has also signed the contract, and the contract deposit, which is stipulated which is a percentage of your down payment, is now with the seller's attorney in their escrow account. So when you sign a contract, you will also be placing a contract deposit. A lot of times in New York, that's 10% of the purchase price, but not always. It's certainly lower. Sometimes you're putting down less money and you're putting down a lower contract deposit, right? But until that moment, when you signed, the seller signed, and the contract deposit has cleared, you're not in contract and the seller has technically zero obligation to, right? So a lot of people misstep that. All right. So anyway, so there's that. So while this actually, sorry, the slides are reversed, but before you're actually in contract, often one of the things that you're doing is you're going to be doing a home inspection. In New York, you do the home inspections before the contract of sale is signed, right? So why do you want to do a home inspection? A lot of homes in New York are 100 years old. There are issues, right? And I promise you, the most unhappy buyers that I've ever worked with are the ones in which I said, listen, you need to do a home inspection. And they said, no, this looks fine. 6 months later, they're like, Damon, the water heater broke. Oh, this happened. Oh, the roof is leaking, And I'm like, you just have to. So I would say, I don't care if you're buying brand new development off the new construction, you're buying a house that's 100 years old, do a home inspection. You will not regret the peace of mind that comes with it, right? Also, with home inspections, sometimes you will find things that are more than you bargained for, right? At which point, occasionally, you're renegotiating the price of the seller. Remember, this is all happening before the actual contract is fully executed. So it's a little bit confusing because my slides were out of order. Sorry about that, guys. But let's say that you thought there was no work in the house, but it turns out there's like a $20,000 repair that you were not ready for, right? It's like imminent, right? You can say to the seller, look, this house is going to cost me $24,000 more to buy. Can we renegotiate the price? Sometimes they're going to tell you to buzz off. sorry, we have 5 offers. You want to buy it, take it or leave it, right? Sometimes they are not. They want to work with you, right? Sometimes they will do a repair credit, things like that. That is also part of the negotiation process that your agent and attorney will carry out with the seller's agent and attorney. All right. So you've made it this far. You're in contract. You've done your inspections. You've made it to contract. Congratulations. You're almost there. Now you have to actually do your real loan application, right? And what you did before the pre-approval was just the lender taking a look at your finances and saying, based on their look of your credit and your finances, here's what we believe we can lend you, right? Reputable lenders will do the right due diligence to make sure that the loan, if they give you a pre-approval, they actually mean what they're saying there. But now that you're in contract, you're starting the actual loan application itself, right? So this is where you're going to need to select a lender. You'll start with them. You'll generally be locking your interest rate. You'll be following up in documentation requests and processing the loan. And basically the steps of the loan are as followed, right? There's pre-approval. Then when you get to contract and you start the loan itself, you are going through loan processing. Once the processor at the bank has collected all the documents, they're then going to be sending that completed loan file to the bank's underwriter. The underwriter is going to review the loan and say, okay, we're willing to make a loan commitment letter to lend you this money. That's a good thing because it's a bank basically saying, okay, we looked at the file, it's been looked at by an underwriter, we're ready to commit the loan, right? Generally speaking, when that loan is committed, there are going to be conditions on the loan, like saying like, okay, we need to verify this tax return, we need to do like home insurance or common conditions, things like that, right? I've seen loan commitment letters that have 40 conditions on them. I've seen loan commitment letters that have 4, right? So a lot of times it's how well your lender prepared you in advance and how good of a job the processors did at actually getting documentation. So this is where it's key to work with a good team. This is where you'll see, for example, not all lenders are created equal. Some lenders are slow as molasses at doing loan processing and underwriting. That's not good for you when you're buying a home. One of the common conditions that you're going to have in a sales contract is a deadline to actually send the seller what is called the loan commitment letter, meaning that the file has been reviewed by underwriting, things like that, right? Without a loan commit, if you're late on the loan commitment letter, the seller can cancel the contract, generally speaking, right? So working with a good team here is super, super, super critical. So at this stage of the process, your agent is often checking in as a lender, you're often checking in as a lender, the attorney's checking in as a lender. Everyone is keeping the seller side of the deal up to speed on what's going on, and you're working through that actual mortgage application, right? So that's a brief summary. There's a lot more that we can go into in terms of like contract contingencies and deadlines and things like that, but that's beyond the scope that I want to talk about here. We can always do a one-on-one to speak more about that, okay? So let's say that everything's all good. You've made it through the commitment letter and the loan, and the lender says, okay, you are clear to close. The seller, the seller's good to go. You're good to go. Everything is great, right? You make it to closing day. Awesome, right? You're not there just yet. Last thing you got to do before closing day generally is schedule what is called a final walkthrough of the home, right? And that basically is to make sure the home that you saw when you were doing your inspection or you're looking at it is the same home that you're buying now, right? And doing the walkthrough is super critical because things could change, right? There could be additional things that happen. There could have been a roof leak. I did a walkthrough once where someone had punched out a wall, right? I did a walkthrough once where the seller just hadn't moved out, right? And they said they weren't ready to close, even though they said they did, right? So they were. So doing the walkthrough is super critical, but let's say that's all good. You're ready to close. At that point, you will be going to the closing. Your attorney will be there, the seller will be there, your agent will be there, the title company will be there, the bank attorney will be there, things like that. And you close. Hallelujah, you've got the keys. Fantastic, right? And that, my friends, is essentially a brief summary of the home buyer process. Now, there's a lot of things, a lot of nuance that comes in every single one of those steps, right? It's not always that easy peasy, right? But that's what you need to buy a house generally in New York. There's a summary of those things here, and FAQs. Looks like my spelling is off here, so forgive me, guys, if you look at the presentation. But question number 1 on FAQs, how do I find a good agent? I touched on that a little bit earlier. Generally, I would always interview 2 or 3 agents. I would interview an agent that's eager. I'd interview an agent that is willing to meet you at your level. Like if you can only talk at 7 o'clock, sometimes you're gonna have to find an agent that's willing to take your call at 7 o'clock, right? You want somebody with market knowledge of the area that you want to buy in, right? You know, they don't necessarily have to be like our team. They don't need to have done $100 million in deals, right? But they need to have like persistence, and they need to like really, you gotta know that person's got your back, right? And if they're gonna fight for you, right? That's the biggest thing I would say when you're choosing an agent, right? And again, I would always say interview 2 or 3. How do I find a good lender? Same thing, right? A lot of people make the mistake with lenders. They think the time that you should be shopping rates is when you're getting a mortgage pre-approval. The truth is that does not matter. When you're looking to get a mortgage pre-approval, the rate that you're getting quoted on the day of that versus the rate that you're actually going to be getting when you start the mortgage are probably going to be different, right? So generally speaking, in terms of comparing your rate, you would be doing that closer to the point when you're signing a sales contract, right? Because that will be a more reflective of where the rates are right now, right? As part of the loan application loan process is what's called locking your interest rate. All right. So what kind of property should I look to buy? Well, that depends on you, right? Again, if you're going to buy a co-op in New York City, most of them do require 20% down. I've seen some that require less, but I'd say 90% of them are going to look at 20% down. Condos, generally not. Usually a lot of condos you can do, depending on the price point, as well as 5% down. Although a lot of people don't do that. We'll do more like 10, 20, 30, but single family houses, same thing. A lot of it's going to depend on your kind of specific situation. Where do you want to live? What's your budget? How long do you intend to be in the home for? What's your intended use of the home, right? Are you going to like have a roommate? Do you have a growing family? Things like that, right? So there's no one size fits all answer. So hopefully that makes sense. Then your thoughts on the housing market. Well, I'll tell you this. My thoughts about 60 days ago were a lot gloomier than they are today. A lot of good things have happened in the United States since the November, December timeframe. Originally, when we first started talking about recession, you know, that I started hearing about that last spring for 2023, right? At the time, inflation was out of control. At the time, the job market was, wages were going up at a pace in which inflation was also ballooning. That's when you started seeing inflation going at like 8.5 or 9% year over year. Inflation has started to tumble. It's still here, right? Like obviously if you go to the grocery store, things are more expensive than they were 2 years ago, but prices are starting to self-correct a little bit, right? And the housing market in New York City specifically, I still think this year will be a relatively stable year for a few reasons. Number one, unlike a lot of cities in the United States, New York City inventory is generally very low. Developers can't just go and build 5,000 new single family houses here like they can in Nashville or Phoenix or Denver or one of those cities, right? Number two, the appreciation here in the pandemic was about 10 or 12% over 2 years, which is right generally in line, about 5 or 6% a year, which is a little bit above the New York average. But for example, some cities in the United States appreciated 40% in 2 years. I always thought that was unsustainable. And those specific submarkets might be in for a little bit of reversion in pricing. In New York City, most people refinance their homes in 2020 and 2021. So you have a lot of people that are not willing to sell today because they have an extremely low interest rate of like 2.5 or 3%, right? So inventory here will probably be very low in 2023. I think the mortgage interest rates will continue to get better throughout the year. I think that the economic, if I had a crystal ball, now I can't guarantee this, I think the talk of recession I think that will start to morph into more of a shallow recession, especially as inflation continues to trickle down, right? And I think that inevitably, over the last 100 years, properties have appreciated in New York City, I think 93 or 94 of them. So if you're buying here, you're in it for the long haul. You're not in it for I wouldn't buy here with the intention that you're going to flip a house in a year or two, right? Unless you're very experienced in that. But if you're going to be here for like 5 or 10 years, in my opinion, there's no better place to be a homeowner in the US for stability, for growth, and for long-term value. So I'm going to take myself off the share. And so we got about 10 minutes left. We had a couple folks in the call today. And does anybody have any questions before we get out of here? I will take that as a no, my friends. So anywho, I appreciate you guys watching. We will share this presentation. And if anyone does come up with questions, you can always find me, damon.bodine@corcoran.com. That is DAMON.B as in boy, ODINE at Corcoran, CORCORAN.com, or my cell is 347-581-2058. All right, guys. And with that said, if you're watching live, have a wonderful weekend. And if not, watching on a replay, let's talk soon. Have a good weekend, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Damon. Have a great weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.